And on today's episode of What Can I Overcomplicate, I make a kid's growth chart. Also learn that I have trouble with numbers. Let's dive right into it. Let's get dusty!
To get started, I grabbed a 8-foot 1x8 and I cut it down to exactly 6 feet long over on the chop saw. Once I had the board cut on the chop saw, I went over the table saw and I ripped off 2 pieces at 3 inches. Once I had those sections all cut up, I went over and I meticulously drew lines at every 1-inch interval, marking it at every 12 inches.
Since I do not have a trench setting on my chop saw and I don't want to cut very deep on these boards, I just set up this little L that is clamped to the chop saw. So you pull it down and it hits it and it gives me my depth repeatedly. So now I'm just going to make all of these cuts using this. If you have a trench setting, you can do it that way, but I don't have that, so this will work.
And with that jig in place, I make about 120 little tiny tick marks meticulously all throughout those 2 boards, and this was not very fun to do. But once that was done, I grabbed another piece of board from that same cutoff, and I cut it about 8 inches long. One end flat cut, the other cut I did a 45-degree miter on, and that is going to be used to be my sliding thing that kind of keeps your heights together. Once that was cut down, I went over to the sander to get a radius right on that flat edge that I had just cut. And to determine my widths on my top and bottom boards is I take that little one I just cut off, slide it in between the 2 with all the tick marks on it, and then I just measure and I just give myself about 1/8 of an inch to let that board slide up and down. Once that measurement is there, I transfer it to 2 boards and back to the chop saw we go. And guess what? I cut those 2 boards to give me my top and my bottom. Now the bottom board needs to have a mitered section in it for that slide to come down and meet that 45-degree I did on that other little piece. And I just attempted to do that the best I could over on the bandsaw. My 45-degree little miter. But now I had to go inside because I want all of my letters to look consistent, so I just used my Cricut and I cut out a bunch of letters that I'll be able to transfer over onto the wood that I just go through, transfer with a pencil, and then I'm going to go through that and I'm going to router all of that out. Once the routering is all complete, you're left with a bunch of fuzzies all over it. So what I do is I take and I just do a quick sand to knock those fuzzies down as much as possible. Once I've got those fuzzies knocked down, I'll actually go through with a Dremel with a point bit and I will try to get those fuzzies down a little bit more. I did find that a Dremel is kind of the best tool for this job.
So this is the point of the video where I tell you I'm not really sure how this is going to work. So what I want to do is all of these grooves that I cut in for these tick marks and all of the numbers and everything that I just routed in, what I want to do is I want to fill those with epoxy, with a colored epoxy. So I'm going to try to tape all the ends here for all of these tick marks so that the epoxy will hold. I'm going to tape both of them and then I'm going to clamp them together and hope that that works as a dam. Last time I did epoxy pour, I made a giant mess. So we're trying something a little different, hopefully something a little bit better. Alright, so this is going to be my craziest epoxy pour I've ever done. I'm doing 3 different colors. I'm going to do the letters of the initials one color. I'm going to do the 12-foot increments in one color and all the inch increments in a different color. So I'm going to mix up I will do the initials first, and that's not going to take up a whole lot.
So this step really isn't even necessary if you're going to be making one of these yourself. I'm only doing it because I just got this epoxy in off of Amazon and I really want to get better with the epoxy. So I'm kind of just using this project to play with it. But if you didn't want to do that, you could take all your routed marks and fill those in with just regular paint. Or if you don't have a router, you literally could just draw them in with a Sharpie or paint all of your lines in that way. This whole process is kind of going a little bit excessive if this is something you're looking to do. But like I said, I was looking to kind of develop a skill set here. And it took a long time, especially trying to get every one of those little tick marks in. But I think in the end it actually came out really good, and it was really fun trying to learn a new skill here. But again, a Sharpie would pretty much do the exact same thing.
Good news is the epoxy did not end up all over the floor. So I'm going to remove all these clamps and we're going to see if I can get these 2 pieces to separate.
Once you have your ticked pieces together, you need to make a groove that runs down the center on the side of the tick. That'll allow that slide to work here. So what I'm doing is I'm running it in one direction, and I'm going to flip it over and run it the other direction. Now what that does is that makes sure that I have a consistently centered groove that runs down the side. And when you're done, you should have a groove that looks something like this. But now we need to take a carriage bolt. I need to take the head off, so I'm just going to give it a quick little... Alright, and then once you have that off, you're going to put that through that sliding piece. Again, I'm using just some channel locks, and we're just going to twist it right on in. Keep in mind that when you're done, you want to have the reveal the same on both ends. So this thing will flip. Can't get my fingers in there. So this thing will flip up and kind of lock against the wall like that. And we are right there. So this thing will sit, and it'll give you your 90 degrees. Your kid's head will sit here, and you'll be able to mark with a pencil where that is. That's the idea, and that's the plan. But the epoxy has not yet completely cured, so I gotta give it a little bit more time. I'm putting fingerprints in it before I start sanding, because if I start sanding now, I'm gonna just gum up that sandpaper. And it's not gonna do a whole lot, but yeah. And while that dries up, I'm gonna take a Forstner bit, and I'm going to sink about 3/8 of an inch on the top and the bottom boards. What that's going to do is that's going to allow me to plug those holes when I put the top and bottom boards on. Now I'm going to take a plug cutter, and I'm just going to cut out some plugs right in just a regular single board through the side. And once those plugs are cut, you can just take a knife and then break those pieces off right there. Nice and simple like that. And I always make just a couple extra, because you always either lose one or one just doesn't turn out really well. And then we're back to sanding. Now we're going to sand the epoxy, and this stuff takes forever to sand down. Once that is sanded down, I'm going to take the top, smear some glue on it, and we're going to screw the top right on. And I'm going to use those plugs that we have just made. I'm going to plug those top holes to make it look a little more finished off. And to put the plugs in, I do smear some glue around the sides. I put them in, kind of get them started, do a little whack with a mallet, and that'll drive them in. Now if you have a big reveal left on there, I will use a small saw like I'm using the coping saw here, cut them down, and then sand it all down nice and smooth. Once you've got the thing completely sanded, you're able to lay on some color. Now I would recommend going with a lighter color stain on this. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow all of that epoxy to really pop.
Alright, so this thing does now have 2 coats of this polycleric clear sateen, because I want a little protection on this, because this is going to be in my house for quite a while. So with that being said, now I can remove the temporary screws in here, put the sliding majoo in here, re-screw that in, plug my holes, should be ready to go. Now I'm not going to actually glue the back, and I'm actually now having second thoughts about even plugging the holes in the bottom. You know, I'm not going to glue or plug the holes in the bottom. A, you're not going to see it because it's going to be towards the ground. And B, that way I can pull this thing apart if this thing ever has problems. I like that. I like that. Literally, you watched me think of that idea. Oh yeah, and to help with the install, I've cut this board, which when put on the bottom, so it'll be sitting on the floor, that will bring this up to the correct height so that all of these little increments will be accurate. Just a little thing, instead of trying to use the tape measure to get your level, cut yourself a little board. We have a problem. So the reason that I'm even building this thing is because we had all of the kids' measurements on a doorway that we just painted, and we painted over all of them. So before, as a good father, before we paint over them, I took all the measurements down, wrote down all of the dates and the measurements, and then I was going to just transfer them onto this, which was going swimmingly. I had one kid's measurements all written down, and then I was going to the other one, and things just weren't making sense to me. And that's because over here, where I did the blue tick mark to be 1 foot, no, that's where the 1 inch actually is. It's not 1 foot. The 1 foot is down here. So which means all these measurements I wrote down here are all now 1 inch off. So what I have to do to fix this is I have to cut out the blue epoxy in here, put red in there, and then sand all of it down to erase all the markings that I just did, and then refinish the whole thing with stain. and clear. I don't know how that happened, but I'm not happy that it happened. All right, we're gonna install this thing after I just fixed it. Don't mind how that looks, because it looks hilarious. Also, don't mind any noise in here because I live with people. And I put on socks so you don't see my feet because you're not paying for that. All right, so we've got this thing centered up. I double checked my little scab board on the bottom to make sure that it raises to the right spot. We're gonna now anchor it to the wall.
And again, using that bottom board put me at the correct height that I needed to be. So once I was at the correct height, put a level on it, I got it leveled off, and then using a drill bit, I went right through the top and the bottom brackets, and then I was able to use those, put wall anchors in, and I used the wall anchors. Now eventually I did have to go through and add some screws in the center to keep the thing completely flat to allow that slide to move up and down without a problem.
All right, let's see if it works. Dang, I'm that tall. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead, back for it. And that is gonna wrap up the growth chart video right here. So as you can see, this thing is made for 2 kids. You could add more if you keep popping them out. And then when the kids are older, you can just make a cut here, make a cut at the bottom, and they can take it and put it in their own home so they can see how tall they were when they were that age. So with that being said, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the next video.